All right, we'll wait a little bit. So, hi everyone. This is Dr. Shiva Idre. Good evening. It's 9:20. What is today? Thursday?
Yeah.
Thursday, September 9th, is it?
Oh,
10th.
10.
Today's September 10th. And I have a great guest here, Benny Smith. And Benny and I are going to continue our series on election fraud, Massachusetts 2020. But the subtitle of today's talk is American Slaves, Part 3. Because I think Benny and I have a perspective as coming from a background of oppression. Many of us in America think that we're living in la-di-da land and there's all this great freedom. And what we're going to continue to discover is that the fundamental process of this country, which is the electoral system, is absolutely written with fraud. It is designed for fraud. And so what I'll do, Benny, is I was just going to review with people a little bit about the new people joining. We'll let people join. But what I'll start with is really reviewing with the past two talks very quickly, at the high level, the election fraud that took place in Massachusetts, the actions that we've taken, including the actual filing of the formal FOIA request with the Secretary of State, which demands that we want all the ballot images. Benny's really going to share as one of the people who really, along with Bev Harris, Ben went in from a very powerful way at the programmatic side to really expose how these voting systems, as I shared yesterday, store the number of votes as a double floating point variable. We'll cover that and the implications of that. And then Benny and I are just going to have a good discussion to talking about the nature of freedom or slavery and what we really live in and the profound knowledge that this should enlighten everyone that the foundation of the voting system that we have is basically fraudulent, right? It's completely the stuff coming out of these voting systems is no evidence of what's actually taking place, right? So it's, as we talked about, it's not an unambiguous prediction. It's an ambiguous prediction, which means there's no evidence that when you get these numbers, it's the reality what's taking place. So let me just remind everyone, that's why people are joining us from Oregon. Um, uh, Someone said, why did you put this out? And it's blinking. I'm not sure. Someone said it's blinking. Can everyone see this on Facebook? Someone said sound is off. Someone is saying sound is off. I think you can hear me, right?
I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Pray for your protection. Thank you. The sound is not off, Crystal. Maybe you should turn yours on. California, we have Fort Worth, Kentucky. Benny, you're out of Tennessee, right?
Memphis, Tennessee.
Memphis,
my sound is working.
Yeah. I'm here in Belmont, Massachusetts. Someone said expose Massachusetts for who they really are. Exactly. And that's what we're doing. Because as we talked about, Massachusetts is really the center of the deep state. This is where they really innovate all the criminal activities and then they promote it throughout the world. Most of these innovations, these insidious innovations, really come out of Massachusetts. So let me quickly review for people sort of where we're at with the campaign. As many of you know, I'm running for U.S. Senate, and you can go to our website. When you go to the website, people can obviously support our campaign. We are now getting people to start pledging in Massachusetts to vote for the campaign. So those of you who are in Massachusetts, you can literally go up here and you can pledge to vote for Dr. Shiva on the November 3rd election. So you put your first name, last name, your email. This is really important because we want to get about 1.5 million pledges documented across Massachusetts. Our ground team is also going to take this to the ground. And those of you who want to volunteer for our campaign can go right here and you can click on volunteer. We have amazing volunteers. In fact, this Friday, we're having a really nice party from 7 to 9 p.m. at our building for all the amazing volunteers who helped us. So if you're volunteers, you volunteer for a campaign, you're welcome to join. But you can go right here and you can volunteer for our campaign. You can volunteer to help make out calls. You can volunteer to actually help us on the ground collect pledges and actually, put up lawn signs, etc. So that's the campaign. And finally, most of you know that the central part of our campaign is to educate people on the principles of truth, freedom, and health. Truth, freedom, and health. And to also educate people on the notion of system. So I never like taking anything for nothing. So those of you who support our campaign, you get access to this really cool book called System and Revolution, which will really educate all of you on, from a control system standpoint, from a very layman's term, what is a system and what does it mean to have revolution? because everyone talks about revolution, but you have to understand what is a system and what is a revolution. So in about 108 pages on this ebook, everyone can learn that. And then you can apply those principles to understand your body as a system. It took me about 20 years to write this very cool software tool, which everyone gets when they support the campaign. It's called Your Body, Your System, where you can use those principles to interrogate yourself and understand what kind of system you are, denoted by the red dot. So this is in this framework of what I call transport, conversion, and storage. All systems have the energy flavors of transport, conversion, and storage. So you can figure out what kind of system you are, and then you can figure out how you're disturbed from your own homeostasis, where your body likes to be. And by the way, this is true of all systems. You're flying an airplane, it wants to go from point A to point B. If it's off course, denoted by the black dot, you make adjustments to bring it back here. And in life, the adjustments you do to your body are through food, exercise, supplements, etc. But the point is, you can use this notion of systems to start understanding your body as a system. So I encourage everyone to take advantage of this. Again, our campaign is really about educating people about the intersection of truth, freedom, and health. Without freedom, we can't really, evoke science to really get a truth. And without truth, we really will never really know what's really going on in terms of what's the real problem is and what the real solution is for the health of our body, our infrastructure, etc. And without health, we don't really have the energy to fight for our freedom. So that's the intersection. That's what this campaign's on. So let me quickly review what we discussed last week before Benny and I start, or not last week, it was yesterday. But yesterday, what I talked about was, and by the way, today's talk is Election Fraud, Massachusetts 2020, American Slaves, Part 3. And it's me, Dr. Shiva, and I also have Benny Smith. Benny, I didn't get all your titles, but what I put out there is you're an election commissioner, right, Benny?
Yep.
You're a data analyst and a computer programmer, among other things.
Yep,
So,
that's good.
And Benny will give his background. So this is what we talked about over the last two talks to really give the big picture of election fraud. Number one, working people today are the victims of this attack. And to give you the level of what's going to working people, one indicator that came out in the Pew Research report about 4 days ago is that 52% of kids today live with their parents. That's higher than the highest level was before that was in the Great Depression, when 48% of kids were living with their parents. And kids, we mean people in the ages of 18 to 28. And we talked about that. We also talked about that the middle class is what's being squeezed. The super wealthy, in the last 3-4 months, 600 billionaires increased their net worth or their value, their balance sheets, by 2.3 trillion. And then you have the poor are essentially getting poorer, and the establishment wants to essentially make some plantation slaves, and essentially have the middle class, which is going to fund all of this. So you have the squeezing of the middle class. And one of the important things is that this is beyond black and white, meaning in places like Massachusetts, people will typically say, yes, the average net worth of a black person is $8 compared to their white counterpart in neighborhoods like Boston, which is around $250,000. However, even white people, low income households, have fallen, their incomes have fallen by half. 40,000 about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, and now down to 20,000. So be it black or white, everyone's being screwed. And we also need to think beyond left or right. The entire paradigm of Democrat and Republicans is all completely nonsense. It's really made just as to divide blacks and whites. So today you have a bunch of people planting the Black Lives Matter sign over here. A lot of liberal whites, by the way, who don't give a damn about black people. And then over here, you have white people saying we don't want to fund the police, or we don't want to defund the police. And that's creating against this left-right narrative. And the reality is police and people have always been united in revolutionary movements. Armies and police have always fought on the side of people. But the right, quote unquote, Republicans want to make this about police, and the left wants to make this about black people. The reality is police and people need to be united. We also talked about issues like forced vaccinations, censorship, crumbling infrastructure, dirty air, dirty water, dirty food, increasing homelessness, and as we're going to talk about, election fraud. All of these go beyond left and right. And that's what our campaign is about. As a part of that, we also talked about, when we summarize, that the US voting systems, and with Benny, we're going to go deeper into this, are really made, they're designed for election fraud. And there is no evidence. We're going to talk about evidence and review that of your vote. And, at a high level, as we talked about, we're all under attack. Forced vaccination on its way in Massachusetts. Massachusetts got an F minus minus in infrastructure, horrible infrastructure, crumbling roads, bridges, water systems. Massachusetts has the highest increase in homelessness in the United States in the last year, higher than California, highest unemployment for the last 3 consecutive months. And racism is the order of the day, to pit blacks against whites. So that's sort of the big picture. Yesterday's talk, we educated people on a little bit about mathematics and computers, right? How computers work. We talked about counting, basic counting, where you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those are called integers, or we call whole numbers, okay? And this is what you learned probably in first or second grade. There's another type of counting where you can add what are called decimals: 1.0, 1.1, 2.75, 3.01, 4.11. Again, probably in fourth or fifth grade, or third or fourth, I don't know where they teach this anymore, those were called decimals, which are not whole numbers. And what this means is if you do 1.1, that means it's 1 and 1/10 of 1/10 of 1, right? Or 2.75 is 2 and 775 over 100, or 3/4 of 1, and so on, okay? So there's a big difference between integers and whole numbers, because you have, for example, the 1, a period, and another amount, which typically denotes a fraction of a number, and we talked about that. And then yesterday, we really wanted to educate. A lot of people are not programmers, but one of the most important things in programming, we talked about, computers are actually very stupid creatures. They don't know anything. You have to tell them everything. And one of the important things you want to tell a computer when you're doing math, particularly, you have to tell the computer what are called variable types or data types. And a computer essentially knows these kinds of data types: a character, which is, for example, like cat or dog, or just the character C in cat, or the A. And these characters can have values at the byte level, -128 to 127, which is basically 255 different types. Integers can go from -32,768 on the negative realm, all the way up to 32,767. We talked about that. We also talked about computers know the concept of a long integer, which is an integer that can have more digits, from -2,147,483,648 to all the way to 2,147,483,647, and so on. And then we talked about that computers also are very, when you do mathematics, typically in physics or science, you have this concept of floating point and double numbers, which is the decimal types. So you have integers and you have floating point. Floating point numbers are where you have 1 point, and after that you can have up to 7 digits. Or you can have what's called double, particularly in physics, where you want, or chemistry, or physical chemistry, where you want to get much more precision. You may add 15 digits after that period, like 1 point, and you have 15 digits, okay? And what we talked about was that these are, so when you're setting up a computer programmer, Benny and I can talk about it. We've both been programming for many years. Programmers are very, very good, particularly programmers if you work for a company or you're going to get fired, if you don't care about your data types. Right, Benny? You have to be,
Right.
I mean, it's not like you randomly choose a data type.
That's right.
It's very consciously done. So here, I did some pseudo programming. I said, imagine you have 2 integers, A and B. You want to add 2 integers. And you have a third integer called C, where you store the results of A and B. So we set A to 1 and B to 2. And then we say C equals A plus B. And we ask Dylan, what's the answer?
3.
3. Okay, 3. Very simple, right? So you get the answer 3. Now, then we took a different case. We said, what happens when you have 2 decimal values, but you're storing in an integer variable, okay? And by the way, there's various nuances here, but broadly, we said let A be 1.11111 and B be 2.22222. And we said, let's say you're adding A and B and you store it in an integer, okay? What will that do? Well, typically it'll round it, but it's not going to be, initially, Dylan, you thought yesterday was going to be 3.33333, right? Well, it isn't. The answer is it's also going to be 3 because it converts it to an integer, right? So this is very important. The adept programmer will know, wait a minute, I did the wrong typing here, okay? So if you want to get the right answer in that case, you have to declare the storage variable C also as a double. So you have A equals 1.11111, and B equals 2.22222. Now, what's the answer, Dylan? 3.333. Right. Yeah. So that's what you get. Okay. But the reason we shared this is to let you know, programmers like Benny and I, we're very careful on what the data types we use, because you could get fired if you get 3 versus 3.3. You could blow up a building. A bridge won't work. A chemical, because if these are chemical equations, you're off, and you could, anyway, mathematicians know that and by the way, this double type or floating points are really built for scientific computation. Fortran was one of the first earliest languages that I learned to program. They had the concept of floating point variables because you were doing very complex arithmetic, not just integers, not just 1 + 1, but these double variables. So the important point is double variables are fractional variables for capturing, those fractions. Okay, for really capturing precision. Okay, so we also discussed the definition of evidence, and I want to review this again because when I started sharing, wait a minute, there was an election fraud took place. Some very dumb people, a lot of these talking head fools, said, "Oh, you don't have the evidence," and I said, "Well, do you know what evidence is? What is the definition of evidence?" "Oh, I don't know." Right. Well, the definition of evidence, according to science, is unambiguous predictions. This is a formal definition of evidence. And the problem is most people don't formalize this definition. Evidence is unambiguous predictions. This is a foundation of everything we have around us. Why an airplane, we're able to go from point A to point B, why your thermostat works, why your car runs, because all of these are based on unambiguous predictions. So I gave the example of using Newton's laws. We can predict if you have a cannon and you have it at 60 degrees and you put a 10-pound cannonball and you put so much force in it, you can exactly predict that trajectory, right? In precision. That's unambiguous predictions. And that came from a lot of hard work that Isaac Newton did to develop the laws of motion. So unambiguous predictions is being able to predict unambiguously where that cannonball will start and where it will go. Now on election night, you're sitting on your TV and you turn it on at 8 p.m. when the polls close and you're seeing 1% voting. Okay, A got this many votes, B got this many votes. And then you see the trajectory of that election. The question is that evidence of what actually took place when people came to vote? And we talked about that. And our position is that we're going to learn is that the voting systems in the United States have no evidence of reality. Okay. And the reason is this: if you take the device or the system, which is the voting machine or the voting process, you as a very good American citizen thinking we have democracy, go in and you cast your vote. Now you may cast your vote in a ballot in a place which counts it by hand, but typically 70-80% today is done by electronic systems or more. In Massachusetts, 51 of the 350 cities, which is 20% do it by hand. The other 80% do it by voting system. So you go in and you give your ballot. It typically in the electronic systems, it's scanned, and it typically, as Benny and I will discuss, and Benny will give more details on this. He knows these systems really well. Is imaged, and when the image is done, optical character recognition is done to figure out your vote. It's counting not the original ballot, but it's counting the image. And those counts are stored in that black box in a program, okay? Now, what we're going to share with you is that if the things here can be manipulated, then it's ambiguous. So the output is not evidence of what actually took place because it's actually ambiguous evidence. And the input, when you look at it, this is the ambiguity of the input. You don't have voter ID. You don't have authentication. You don't have receipt. You can't even prove that you went and voted in an election. There's no proof. I can say I went and voted. They're checking me off. But by and large, there's no proof that voting actually took place. So that's one part where the input itself is ambiguous. The second piece of this is, consider this, the output. Let's say 10 people vote for A, 20 people vote for B. The output should give 10 votes for A and 20 votes for B, provided the system cannot change that output, right? And what Benny and Bev Harris and John Brakey have really educated me on over the last week is that it's not true, because it is possible that you can change those numbers given the discoveries that Benny and Bev Harris have made from the Diebold systems, that you can actually change the vote by multiplying it by a factor and fractionalizing it. So the evidence is not evidence since the output is ambiguous. All right. And then we talked about some of the inconsistencies in the election that I and our volunteers were actually taken advantage of. And we're not going to take it lying down. We're coming back with a write-in campaign, as we've talked about. But these were the activities of our campaign: 20,000 plus donations, 3,000 plus volunteers, 500 plus standouts, 7,000 lawn signs, 500,000 business cards. We, from all of your generous efforts, we raised over $500,000, and we put it all into billboards advertising. 95% of people in Massachusetts know Dr. Shiva in the name. 250 plus cities we visited, door to door. So we had a real campaign compared to the doofus. We're not even going to give many. We call him the doofus, a doofus found by the Republican governor. This doofus was nowhere to be seen. No campaigning, no active volunteers, no brand equity, no organizations, no lawn signs, no bumper stickers. And what was the result of this? The doofus got 60 to 40% against me in Black, Hispanic, and all white neighborhoods. By the way, Lawrence has 30% unemployment. You're telling me that they voted for this guy who was nowhere to be found. And in the night of the election, Benny, I think I may have shared this with you, the Secretary of State literally, 12 hours before the election starts, this is what he says. He predicts, and this guy, by the way, is very corrupt. He was indicted, actually, by the Department of Justice, and he still gets to be Secretary of State. He said only 150,000 Republicans are going to vote. He had already received about 90,000 mail-in votes. So he's telling us only 55,000 Republicans will vote in person. That's what he put out in a news release. Meanwhile, he's predicting 1.2 million Democrats are going to vote, and he already has close to 750,000 mail-in ballots. So why did he predict only 150 Republicans are going to vote when the year before this, 2 years before, 260,000 Republicans voted? Why is he doing that? And the reality was, this is what actually took place. In 2018, 600,000 Democrats voted, 261 Republicans voted, for a total of this many Republican voters. And in 2020, 1.4 million Democrats voted, but only 259 Republicans, going down, even though this news release said we're going to have the highest primary turnout. So the end result is 100% increase in Democrat voters and a 0.5% increase. It makes no sense. You can clearly see that this number in our prediction should at least have been 320,000. That's what we talked about. And then we talked about the software mechanics of fraud. And then, Benny, I think it'd be good for you to hop in right here. Let me, and you can correct me if any of this stuff here, but let me bring this up here. So what I talked about, Benny, yesterday was that there's a system called the Diebold system, which you and Bev Harris dove really deep into. And this was a GEMS manual. And I think, Benny, maybe you can start sharing shortly how this was really one of the original systems. And this company was bought in various incantations. And many of 90% of the voting systems really use the same core software. I also shared with everyone yesterday, I wanted to educate people, Benny, on software. That all software really has three layers. The presentation layer is what we know as a user interface. The business logic layer is the interface between the UI to the data layer, where the data is actually stored. So typically, I think in the Diebold system, you're saying they use like crystal reports for presenting the data, like nice bars and graphs, which they give to CNN and Fox News. And then, but the data is stored in a database, okay? And what we talked about was that in this database, in the GEMS manual, they give very, very beautiful description. And people can go to the previous video to talk about this, how these systems, if you look at it, pretty much are enterprise systems. They set up everything. They set up the voting, the printing of the ballots, what kind of race you can have, a one-on-one race, one-on-three race, so on. And there's a whole workflow that they describe. And one of the things we pointed out was on page 156 of this manual, or 2-156, they have the notion of you can set up different kinds of races. And Benny, you brought this out in the website that you and Bev figured out that there was a release note put out in 2001, June of 2001, saying that they have a thing called a weighted race type. And what that says is that a race can be weighted. So even if I got 10 votes and Benny got 20 votes, you could multiply my 10 votes by 5 or 0.5, and Benny's could be multiplied by 10. So my votes, 0.5, could become 5 votes, and Benny's 20 votes could become 200 votes. That there's a feature built into these systems which lets you multiply the votes by a number, and that number could be a fraction. And there's examples we shared about this. And one of the things that Benny discovered, because Benny, I think you want to talk about, you actually got the software, right, Benny? And you started maybe playing around with it, and you found out that when you set the race type to 10, voila, the entire user interface changes, and you could do weighted race types. And Benny will talk about that. And then Benny and Bev Harris, through various types of FOIAs, they actually were able to show when they actually loaded the data up from one of the elections in 2004 that, for example, the Kerry Edwards race versus Bush Cheney in 2004, the data is in fact stored, the number of votes, by default as decimals, as you can see here. So the question is, why are they storing whole number of votes as decimals? And that's what we talked about. And then Benny brought this out. He said the fraction vote capability is built into the GEM system for all races, right, Benny? Whether it's weighted or not, it's
Right.
one of the big discoveries. And I think the biggest discovery that Benny made, which I think the world needs to know about this, is that when Benny actually opened up the database in the voting system and looked at the database structure, total votes, the number is stored as a double variable. This is probably one of the most profound things that everyone needs to take away. Why are they storing my votes as a decimal number, as Benny showed evidence of right here? This is really the issue. So Benny, I'm going to, let's go into conversation mode here. But Benny, that's what we discussed over the last two conversations. And Benny, maybe you can really share with us how you got into this, and what, and then we'll start discussing. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me, man. It's been a joy to kind of talk about this subject with you. It's so funny to hear you, like you got so many accolades, and I'm just such a basic guy that can get an arithmetic expression and talk about it with some understanding. But when I talked about the double feature being the most important thing, nope, and everybody thought that was trivial. And it's so refreshing to hear, somebody who's like-minded to understand the significance of just that one little change, right? It's not a default setting. You have to burn a few calories to change it. But by way of background, I'm a programmer, so I got some skin in the game. I can get fired for the code I write. It's not theory for me; it's actual practice. And I just believe that theory is skewed by practice every day and twice on Sundays. So I've been known as the numbers guy in Shelby County. I've been writing predictive analytics. My background is analytics, and I'm a data nut. I write code. I deal with data. I deal with those three different layers. I do analytics, which is the presentation layer. So I'm dealing with data a lot. And I wrote this program that really is geared to take the cost down of running in elections and help candidates run for office if they were serious, to give them a way of reaching the public in a way that was a little bit more scientific in the approach, because the electoral process is basically a needle in a haystack. So my whole bailiwick was trying to create a stack of needles for people. And during that process, most of the people, if they wanted to get elected, they came through me. And I would run campaigns and help people run for office. But in 2014, a number of those candidates, they came to me and they were insisting that their elections have been stolen. And I'm the guy that's running all the numbers, and I'm saying you probably lost, right? I didn't see you knocking on any doors, showing up at the church ain't enough, and putting flyers in cars. You actually got to touch some tangible people. You got to get some donations, right? A lot of the things that you're showing on your slides, I was telling those people, you got to have some donations, right? You got to have there has to be some strategic planning around running a campaign where you have some civic engagement and involvement. But as a consolation prize, I'm a software developer. I got about 200,000 lines of code under my belt. As a consolation prize, I said, well, I'll look at the software, right? So I reached out to Bev Harris of blackboxvoting.org. She had the software that we use in Shelby County. We still use it. We're going to vote in the November election on this same software that you're describing. We're going to use that in November. But she gave me, these files that were results of discovery from court cases. And I just basically took a look at the system. I didn't reverse engineer it. I didn't use a Gidra or anything like that. I did it all legal. So I didn't want to do anything that would give me any advantages. And I basically just wrote on a whiteboard. I had to ask myself to lay out the framework. I said, if I was going to steal an election for myself, how would I do it? I'm obviously going to do it good, and I got to do it without getting caught. And I figured out my design requirements. And another piece of my background, I write a lot of software that's for finance, and that's such a different animal when you deal with finance, because the term that I'm going to use, every finance guy is going to know what it is, right? It's a basic function that you see in finance all the time. And just by way of experience, I built an application that a company, they push about $180 million worth of commission payments through it. I really don't remember a single line of code that I wrote for it. I really don't. I did a $2 billion budget using allocations, and this is the feature that I'll probably highlight tonight. And I was only off by $2 after rounding. Now, if you would have told a finance guy that I was off $250,000, they would have said, this is our guy, because they understand the need for decimal precision. If you guys everybody's watching, just go look at the gas. Next time you go to the gas station, it's 3 decimal places. It's not 2, right? The money doesn't operate in the finance realm like people think it does. The second decimal place is cents. So what's the third decimal? What's the third decimal place, right? That's the precision, so that when you do this approximation by allocation, that's how you distribute money top down or bottoms up in a way that gives you an approximation, right? So I laid out that in order for this to work, there was one variable that I couldn't get around, right? There's one variable you can't predict, and that's how many people who's going to walk into the polling place. You're just not going to know, right? So there are people who say, well, you can take every third vote. Well, you can't. That sound good, but you can't do that, right? If you have an even number, you're still gonna lose. But if you could assign a percentage allocation amount, then that would actually work, because you could do that on the fly. It wouldn't take a lot of computational power. But there was one requirement, and the example I always give is if you can't predict how many people are going to walk in. So let's say Shiva, you're going to win this race, by the way. Let's say that Shiva is running against me. And we've decided that Shiva is going to get 70% of whoever walks into the booth, right? 10 people walk into the booth, Shiva gets 7 votes. What if 9 people walk in? What do I give him? That's 6.3, right? Shiva, you the math guy, but I think that's 6.3. That's 6.3. You cannot do that, right? I just chopped the whole torso off of a person if I tried to do that. 0.3 of a person, I'm just leaving them with the legs, right? So I surmised that in order for this to work, I was like, it's a deal breaker if it's not there, because it's going to be a wonky, clumpy application that is going to have round off errors and these typical things that you see in finance. They're not going to be accessible. So the first thing that I did was I went to look at the database to see how they counted it. The default setting is long integer, and a derived setting or a user changed or programmer changed setting, there it is double. And that's what makes this so important, because they count us like money at that point, right? So now we're not one person. You have completely obliterated the notion of one person, one vote, right? That where you highlight now, that look like we're talking about how much money somebody has in the bank, right? It's a banking program now. We're looking at cents on the dollar, right? And when you allow that counting mechanism to exist in an application that really should be long integer, right? Long integer gives you 2 billion, right? So there's not going to be a precinct with 2 billion people voting in it. So that's a plenty. that's a plenty. That's not going to be 2 billion people to vote in the U.S. We probably got 300 million, citizens. So there's no reason for that to be there. There has to be intentional. So literally, once I found that that double feature was there, I started Googling a lot of these documents that got leaked when Bev Harris found the source code files, and I went searching for emails to see that the program. I knew the programmers were going to struggle with how many decimal places to use. I think NASA uses 15 decimal places when they calculate. They use 15 decimal places of pi, right? If you don't think it matters, just chop it off. You're gonna miss the moon by a mile. All of that precision will add up over time. So it's a very significant piece of architecture that you would use in an election like this. And that, when I found it, I was like, nobody's gonna believe, like, it's such a dense subject, right? And I applaud you for, like, you get it, right? So you're probably the first person that got it immediately.
Benny, I think one of the important things to summarize is that I think the bottom line here is that if people are walking into a voting booth, right, and you and I are running, right, and the point you're saying is that in order to cheat, this is the reverse engineering that you did, you'd have to be able to do allocations.
Yes.
Right? So 70% of the votes go to Shiva, regardless of whatever happens, and 30% go to Benny.
Right.
In order to do that allocation, if you simply did, I think the case you said, 70% of 9 people, 6.3, that means the 30% of the other people would be 2.7. So what do you do with this problem, right, that you actually have?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have a double variable, longer digits, in order to be able to do the allocation.
Yeah, the best example, layman example I give is, let's say for the audience that me and Shiva are going to split a precinct down the middle, right? And somebody was foolish enough to give us 50-50, right? But 3 people walked into the booth. That's 4 votes. You can't do it. 1.5 and 1.5, right? You can't do it. 1.5 and 1.5. 1.5 rounds up to 2, and the other 1.5 rounds up to 2. So you're going to be over by 1 vote. So you see scenarios where there are more votes than voters or less votes than the participants, and that's just, that's not good.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important things. So because this feature exists, if it's misused the wrong way, you're going to get that round off error, because they're doing, some of these people are very foolish, right? Because they have a lot of hubris. So you have to get the ballot images and compare them to the actual participants who actually voted, which is what we've asked for from the Secretary of State, because, it's pretty clear some serious cheating took place here. So it's
with the ballot image, that is the one thing that an algorithm can't touch, right? Well, if I give you 0.5 of a circle, I still voted for Shiva, right? The intent is still enshrined there. And when you're running, like, I can hide 100,000 votes in a computer program, but I can't hide 100,000 images. I can't hide 100,000.
One thing I just want to do is, yesterday when we did our live, right? A woman recorded, we're talking about, basically, by the way, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube do not want to acknowledge election fraud takes place. When I put this thing out, I called it #election-fraud, Massachusetts 2020 American slaves. And what we noticed yesterday was, the first day they didn't catch on. The second day, which was yesterday, we noticed that Facebook, literally when the video was up, the post was up, people were trying to like it and share it, Benny. People weren't able to do that. So I just wanted to take a quick break and just show people that when we talk about election fraud, the major big tech does not want to talk about election fraud, because they're part of it. They're part of the election fraud. So I just wanted, someone just reminded me to share this. Yesterday, when I was sharing this, I can share it right here in the Chrome tab window. You will literally see here, I don't know if you can see this, Benny. This is a woman who is literally, maybe I can make this a little bit bigger and I'll rewind it. She actually, she did a great job, Crystal Ellis. She actually videotaped on her own machine how she is attempting to share her video, okay, or like it. So you can see here, she is literally going to our video, which is on election fraud, and hitting the like button, and it goes away. Hits it again, tries to like it. Look at it, it goes away. Tries to like it, it goes away. But then she goes and likes someone else's post. Wow. Look at this, like someone else's, fine. And so on. comes back and wants to like our thing. Okay.
Oh, wow.
This is a fraud. This is like fraud to the power of two. They don't even want us talking about election fraud. Okay. So I wanted to share that with people so there's no illusions, because this is caught red-handed, and organizations like Google and Facebook and Twitter do not want us discussing election fraud. And I'm getting a lot of messages here that people are throttling this, right? Because I think we want to talk about that, right? Because what we're talking about is you and Bev have clearly found out that all the election systems are basically, if you and I run, they could overnight multiply bias by a percentage, fix the votes,
Few seconds.
store it as a double variable. And I think what Benny discovered is huge. And a lot of people don't get the importance of this discovery, is that why are you storing a whole number as a floating point variable? Yeah. That itself nullifies, to me, anyone who says, oh, you need to prove to me that, no, you need to prove why the hell you put in a floating point variable, right, Benny? This is what people really need to talk about. Why is the software program, and by the way, this is, I think, in every program, right? It's a default setting.
Yep. That each of the, I know that when this, because this study, I did this in 2015, and Bloomberg Business Week, they wrote about it in 2016, and they did it as a part of their cybersecurity segment. This was literally 4 years ago now, and we had similar stories when it was being published, and people were trying to share the links. They were saying that they couldn't share it. We called the proof of concept fraction magic, even though it was reasonably vetted. Bloomberg isn't going to write some trash, right? I basically did everything. Shout out to George Munger. I see a guy I know that just he's a former commissioner. He was the one that gave me the files that I used.
Okay.
But when you consider that it was completely taboo to talk about this, the subject that everybody hones in on is voter fraud, right? That's what you hear, voter fraud. But a person doesn't have any incentive to commit fraud more than an election official has to remain in power, and that's kind of the mantra that was what I used to build the application that I built to kind of show this. It's not a hack, right? Let's just dispel the notion that what I developed was a hack. It was literally I took the developer's manuals and I built it to spec, and that proof of concept, we called it fraction magic. It's a complete exploitation of one person, one vote. And that's just the most significant takeaway from it.
But Benny, just to let people know what you did, you went and got the actual software of the GEM software, loaded it up on a server, which has that 3-tier architecture, a presentation layer where people can see the votes coming in, and a database, which is basically a Microsoft Access database. So it's pretty rudimentary in some sense.
Yep, it's a basic mid 2000 level application. There's a lot of sophistication and nuance inside of it.
Right.
We'll schedule maybe some in the next week or so. We'll do a demonstration for your audience to show them. It's gonna floor you, man. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The level of precision. I just say you get to be God without His permission, and that's just a rough place to be in when you're talking about so much power that changes hands through the electoral process.
I think one of the most important things you told me was when that software is on that server, the database has no password protection.
No,
This is quite amazing. So who knows anything about databases, which means you could write an external program which is what you wrote, to literally find that value where the total votes is, which is a double, do your own math, allocate, and update it, right? So
that's exactly what I did.
Within seconds, you could update that. So you could imagine that, one call is made on election day, things aren't going well, to a person, and they literally can update the values on that server because it's a fractional value to whatever they want. And that's what Benny unequivocally showed. He wrote his own program that could go right into that database. I think that's probably the most important thing people need to understand, that you're able to manipulate that value, because of software, the database is accessible. You can go right to the database layer. You don't need to go through the UI. You don't need to go to the middleware, you can go right at the database layer and just write your own code.
Yeah, and the other important thing about that is when you do it that way, you miss the audit logs. You're completely undetected at that point. There's no code to delete and eat. I hear people say all the time, "Oh, you got to have some self-eating or deleting code." I'm like, dude, they never knew I was there. I'm the last thing they saw before they went night night, and you don't know that I was there. So people who write code, sometimes we can disagree on the merits, but we can't disagree on the facts.
Yeah. So I think this part of the discussion, I wanted you to hear from the person who actually found this in the code, is that the variable for total votes, just to keep it really simple, to validate this, you heard it from me yesterday, is stored as a non-whole number. And everyone should be asking everyone, for that matter, why is our votes stored as fractions? And the reason we entitled this American Slaves is, remember, slaves were thought of as 5/8 of a human being, right?
3/5. Yeah. So I got a story on that one actually. When I was conducting the study, I realized that there were two layers. There's like two levels of books. That you have the total level where it's just two totals. It's me and you. She was the winner. I'm the loser. But then there are the precinct level totals, right? And each precinct level has different counter groups. So you got early voters, you have absentee voters, and you have people who participate at the polls. So the complexity of what you do is more granular at the lower level. When we're below we're in the data layer now, right? So that structure, you're going to have a lot more round off errors at that lower level of precision. So I went asking for that report, and I'll just say, like, I am a sitting election commissioner who cannot get that report now. I'm asking for that report now, and I can't get it as a sitting election commissioner. But I was a citizen when I was conducting this study. I asked Commissioner Norma Lester at the time. She got me that report, and so I was conducting this study, and I basically said, well, if I'm going to do this type of election theft, because it's election fraud, not voter fraud, I had surmised that I said, does anybody have an incentive to remain in power? And that was a resounding yes. And the next question was, well, what would you do to stay in power? And that's like lie, cheat, steal, kill. Kill is still on the table because people do. Yeah, me and you, we're not feeling suicidal, Shiva. So that is a lot. There's a lot at stake to win an election. There's a lot of power. So I literally said, well, if you're going to do it, you have to do it at the least level of getting caught. And that would be at the central tabulator level because there's a lot less granularity there. So I went to the polls and I shout out to BlackBerry. I took a picture with my BlackBerry. I took a picture of the poll tape, right? And that was literally like a cash register receipt of the totals at that precinct. And when I took that picture, it was 548 votes. And then when it hit the central tabulator, that same precinct only reported 330 votes. Now, mind you, I'm studying fraction magic. I'm looking for any type of anomalies, and I run across another error. This wasn't the presence of fraction magic. This was another error. But to your point, 548 missing that 200 and something votes was almost 40%.
Yeah.
So I'm like 3/5 in decimal form is 0.6. So if I lost 4% of the value, are they counting us as 3? Like literally, I'm going crazy in my head. I'm like, are they counting us as 3/5? And it turned out not to be the case. It was just a whole memory card that dropped. It was a whole another error that I found, which just underscores the fact that even if you don't subscribe to the theory that there can be an election fraud, it's just times if computers just flat out don't count right. So you have to have something that is transparent and authenticatable, right? You have to be able to. There may be some that say, well, Shiva probably lost. Well, what is it to Shiva that he can't know that, right? Why doesn't Shiva have any evidence that that's the case, right? You are a complete math head, and that is not going to resolve in your mind. And the more you look for a resolution, the more questions you end up with. You end up in this rabbit hole that I've been in for 4 years. So
I think this is the issue, right? So you're getting a result. You see on Fox News or CNN, person A got 100 votes, person B got 50 votes. So if you just look at it very simply, where is those two numbers coming from? It's
Right.
coming from the output of a computer system.
Right.
Now, in order for that to be evidence, it has to be unambiguous, which means you should be able to trace it back through the entire process
Yep.
and find out where it was. So yesterday, Dylan, come on over here, say hello. Dylan and I went over. Dylan went over, and he videotaped me handing this request right here to the Secretary of State, and in that we said, look, we want all the ballot images, right? Because the ballots go through the image scanner, and then the optical thing is counting that. We wanted all the ballot images, we wanted all the voting records, etc. And the guy at the front desk, he out of nowhere, we were absolutely kind. We were, I can get pretty angry with these people. I was very kind, suit and tie. And he said out of nowhere, "What do you think? The election is rigged or something?" Out of nowhere. We didn't even bring that up. And the next thing he said was, "Oh, you're asking for ballot images. We don't have those. I believe that feature was turned off." Out of nowhere, he makes this point. And I said, well, I said, I believe that's a standard feature of the Debo. That's all we said. But here's a front desk guy who's telling us that he believes this ballot imaging feature was turned off. That means if it's turned off, we can never know the evidence. And this is no different than in science. This just happened with a research paper that came out 2 months ago on hydroxychloroquine. People did a research experiment, and the research paper said hydroxychloroquine, which Trump has been saying is not dangerous, right? And he's saying it's a solution. The Lancet paper, the Lancet is one of the most prestigious medical journals. It had published that hydroxychloroquine is absolutely dangerous. Well, someone said, "Oh, really? Can you show me the data, like the ballot images?"
Yeah.
Guess what? The guy says, "We don't have the data. The vendor where we got the data doesn't want to give it to us." That's what this is. That paper was retracted. So if they can't give us the ballot images, this election should be retracted, because it means you cannot prove its evidence. So, Benny, I think it'd be valuable for people to understand at the software level what you and I were talking about is that the standard feature is the ballot images are saved, right? And the 22-month rule and all this.
Yeah, so I work with Audit USA. John Brakey is a juggernaut in this part. When we were doing, there was Mimi Kennedy, me, Bev Harris, and John Brakey when we were doing the video for Fraction Magic, and John kept asking me a question. He was like, "What did you do to the ballot images? What did you do to the ballot images?" I said, "Man, I tried to get at them, but it just nukes them." Right. Whenever I run Fraction Magic, it completely destroys those images, because the image can't figure out what to do with a decimal place. It's a picture, right? You can't do anything with it. And I said, well, it destroys them. And he said, well, if we went after ballot images, we should be worried if they don't want to give them to us. And I said, absolutely, because that would be the proof positive of what actually happened. And we studied the manuals, and John has really been the champion of this. He started the Ballot Image Project, and he literally goes to every town suing for ballot images. And it's just amazing to see. He's suing the entire state of Florida right now. I think the Secretary of State for California, Secretary Padilla, is basically warning counties that they cannot turn this off. And here's the reason why, right? I'm gonna put my commissioner hat on, right? Federal statute says that anything in connection with conducting election has to be preserved for 22 months. Well, the newer technology uses those images to derive every characterization and count. It doesn't, when you put the ballot through a scanner, it doesn't count the ballot, it counts the image. So that's like, getting rushed to the hospital and burning up the ambulance, right? You just can't do that. Or that's like saying, this plane crashed, but let's not look for the black box, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting, Benny, is this guy is telling us at the Secretary, he's saying, I don't have the ballot images, and I believe that feature was turned off. This is in a U.S. Senate federal election, and he's telling that to me, the candidate with all of his volunteers who busted his buns doing all this work. So that's the level of people they are. They're basically, he's telling me the ballot image. Now and then he sort of stepped back. He forgot what the hell he actually said. And he said, I'll put it in writing. I'll put all this in writing. So we don't know what's going to come in writing, but we do know that that this is violation of federal law because they're supposed to save it for 22 months. Is that right? Yeah.
You ran in a federal election, and anything that was, if a record was created, then it was supposed to be preserved. And I know for most of these machines by default, it has to have the image, because they're not to get too technical, but there's a cast vote record that's going to create a log of the undervotes and the overvotes, so that you can go back and authenticate some of these results. And the vendors, they get a hard time, and I give them a hard time. I'm not letting up off the gas on the vendors, but they actually make these software platforms to be auditable. It's just that they are configurable, right? I would not allow you to put your car in reverse before you put your foot on the brake. It's just a suicide mission, right? So to allow you to bypass that feature is just something that really does not comport with reality, and I would think should be liability for something like that.
So I think a couple of takeaway points just in this part is that your votes are stored as a numerical value.
Money.
That is a decimal, a fraction, like money, like $5.04.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other thing is that in these electronic systems, pursuant to law, what they're actually counting is not the ballot. So that you take the ballot, the paper ballot gets put God knows where. Some cases it's been shredded, like in the Tim Canova case, right? And then they're actually analyzing the ballot image. So the ballot image is what was used for counting, and by law, that ballot image should be saved. And
go ahead.
And I think what you found was if the fractional voting was in place, which is we're having or multiplying it by, let's say my votes were fractionalized, the ballot images were likely deleted, because you can't have the ballot images around. Yeah. So you're going to delete them. That's what's going to come out of this request that we found out. It's going to be a big, big wake up call to a lot of people if they can't deliver us the ballot images.
Yeah. I expect a full head of steam not to give you a single image, for sure. There was one thing that you said that I wanted to correct. The software, if you and that's where you got the right concept, Shiva. If you were building it, this is how you would build it. And if I was building it, OCR, you would think that when you fill in that ballot, the bubble will find that bubble and go and extract the name.
Right.
But it doesn't. It goes and extracts an identity from it. And if you were doing it correctly, you would go and extract the name. And the other piece that I would say to just lend a little credence to your write-in campaign is the one thing that I couldn't play with was the ballot images or the write-in votes. The write-in votes, they are documented, and they have to keep those.
So to everyone listening, again, getting back to our campaign, we don't let up. You come from a slave background, you always want to get off the plantation, okay? But if you never have been a slave and you forgot you're a slave, you can remain on that plantation for a long time. I came from a untouchable background, as I shared with you, Benny, where we were treated as racism on steroids in India. So my whole life has been trying to get off the plantation, and to me, coming to America was icing on the cake. And I know you've shared a little bit about your background, but I think people need to understand what this system really shares with us is we're all slaves. We're actually slaves, and our level of slavery can be manipulated by the fact that we're decimal votes. And as Benny shared, this is not only at the aggregate level, they can control that number, they can control it precinct by precinct by precinct. Benny, we did an analysis of all the votes that we got, and we ran through county by county by county. Interesting data, and we're still getting it with more data. In one of the counties where this fool gets 60-40 everywhere, 60-40% in Hispanic neighborhoods, 60-40% in Black neighborhoods, 60-40% in white neighborhoods. This guy's a man for all seasons,
Right.
Guys out there.
Right.
Well, this is what's interesting. Franklin County is all white working class people. We won there. Okay, like 55-45. We beat this guy by 6 to 10 points. Guess what? 70% of the votes in that county were counted by hand-drawn ballot.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That makes sense.
Yeah, so this is something. And then you go look at all the other counties, it's like 90% of the votes was done by digital scans. Yeah. So our view, Benny, you and I have talked about this, that my view is about 100,000 ballots were just thrown away, okay? because there should not have been less voting this time than last 2 years ago. There should have been at least 320,000 votes. So my view is about 60 to 100,000 votes were just tossed. And then they applied this factoring 60-40 across the board. But they couldn't do it in the hand counted voted areas.
Yeah, you can do it in
Franklin County, we won. We won, and 70% of the votes in those towns were hand counted. So to everyone listening out there, that's why we're going to be running a write-in campaign. And everyone out there, whether you're outside of the United States or outside of Mass, what we need you to do right now is to tell all your friends in Massachusetts to go right to our website, which is right here. Let me go right here and tell people that one of the important things they can do in a very practical way to help us right now is to go right up to this website where we're actually starting to get people can say right here, I vote for Dr. Shiva. What we're doing, Benny, is we're telling people to tell us now, almost a documentation, that they're going to pledge to vote for us so that we get their SMS thing and we can actually start communicating with them. And we're going to tell all of our ground volunteers. So everyone out there, if you know friends in Massachusetts or you're in Massachusetts and you don't want to be an American slave, get out of your slavery and start pledging to us now. To Benny's point, we're going to do a write-in campaign. And this write-in campaign gives us a huge advantage of tracking everything. The cheating is diminished significantly. The other thing is people can literally go here and they can volunteer to help us collect pledges. We're going to have an army of people literally starting to communicate with people. So you can also go here and volunteer to be a volunteer. I mean, you can sign up to be a volunteer. So, but I think, Benny, to your point, this is why a write-in campaign, I mean, it's obviously a lot more work. We're going to have to work. They don't work. The good news is we spent so much money last time, Benny. 95% of people in Massachusetts know. So if someone wears our hat and our t-shirt, people are going to come to you and you can tell them, you know what? We're all slaves. We got to stop this election fraud. We're all slaves. They want to force vaccinate us. We're all slaves. People like Google and Facebook are wanting to censor us, which are one of the foundation, the things that we want to fight against. We want freedom. We don't want big tech to own anything. We own everything. We want real health against forced vaccination. One size doesn't fit all. And we're fighting for truth with, this whole election fraud stuff. So I think people have a huge opportunity to really get off their butts. You can't be complaining because what we're sharing in this video today and what we shared, in the last 2 days is election fraud is how the establishment keeps us slaves. This is sort of the foundation of quote unquote American democracy. And I think this is more dangerous, I believe, than the expose I did on Monsanto or even the expose we did on Fauci, because this goes even deeper to the essence of political power. And I think you were telling me earlier, Benny, that someone in your county put in $8 million to run for a governor.
Oh, yeah. So
it's important to tell people the importance of that.
Right. I want to underscore one thing that this is a fiercely nonpartisan issue. Everybody who's listening, anybody who is, whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, you should want to prove that elections are real. Right? You want to prove that elections are real, and it's really hard to stop a landslide. She was a Republican, but I'm a Democrat. I'm a staunch Democrat. We are talking exactly the same language. They say math is the language of all. So we are literally talking about his right to run on the issues that he believes he represents his constituent base from. We had a guy who ran for governor. He probably worth $50 million, but he spent about $8 million out of his pocket in the late 90s, and he lost. And he ran again. Maybe about 14 years later, and he became the governor. But I literally jingled that part of my brain that says, why would you want to spend $8 million to run for a seat that's only going to pay you less than $1 million over 4 years? And then it hit me. Power. You already got the money. You can give your buddy a $50 million contract annually across the entire state if you're the person that is the arbiter and an authoritarian over some of these contracts. So if you look at the way governments are run, there is a lot of power and control when you are the person who is controlling the purse strings of an entire state. We collect taxes. Everybody pays to the capital city, and the governor decides where that money goes.
Yeah, and I think you follow the money. People like us, working people coming into power, where we're going to do the right things on the interests of working people beyond left and right. That is a very dangerous thing to the establishment,
Right.
especially when we rally people around an issue like this, Benny, on something like a voter fraud. That's going to
Yeah.
break down the
Stop
barrier.
putting it on us. Stop telling us that we commit the fraud, right?
Right.
Y'all commit the fraud.
Exactly. Yeah. So
I'm
the
trying
thing
to
is,
stay in power.
I think the foolish people, when we look, it takes me a lot of time to say, someone defrauded me, right? It's
Right.
a lot of effort,
Right.
but they must prove, just like in science, if I bring up a question, wait a minute, can I see your data on hydroxychloroquine? According to the scientific method, the journal must show me the data.
Right.
And we have to really turn the tables in the right way. The government, we pay them. We are the consumers. Show me the data. Show me the money in some ways.
I'm glad you made that point, because I'm gonna put the election commission hat on. This is all supposed to be public information.
Yeah,
right?
Benny's an election commissioner. Everyone listen to him. He's actually an election commissioner.
Right. This information is supposed to be made available to the public. Those are freedom of information. That's FOIA, right? What Shiva did was he asked for what he is entitled to, not as a candidate, as a citizen. He's supposed, look, there are two P's that don't belong in the same room together, right? Public and proprietary. And that is literally the perfect storm that we have wandered into. We pay for this equipment. We buy this proprietary equipment with public dollars. And then a public citizen demands or wants to see that information, and he's told that that information that was bought with public dollars is proprietary. There's something wrong with that. There's something entirely wrong with that. And in private industries, if it's a publicly traded company, you got SOX and a bunch of other things where you got auditors. Ernst & Young is coming in to look at and audit the records. You don't have it in government, right? You just don't have it. You just don't have that in government. So they can run rampant with impunity. And as long as they take somebody who isn't willing to fight, that's why I applaud you, Shiva, man. Like, I really applaud that you're not gonna take it sitting down. Like, you really want to pursue an authenticatable result. If they gave you 4 million pieces of paper and you could go and count it all and believe that it was true because they gave it to you, in a reasonable time frame, you can accept losing. But it's real hard when you can't even authenticate it, right?
And I think that's the issue, Benny, because when we started, our discussion early on, I do math, man. I've been doing math all my life, right?
Yeah, you're a math guy.
I know math. I've won. Give you an idea. Many years ago, I never played poker, right? I can do counting reasonably well. I won $1 million poker game, okay? Because I can do counting and I can do prediction. I won so many prediction games just using basic math, okay? And I don't want to go through all that, but I want to give that background. So when we ran this campaign like a professional organization. We had amazing world-class people every morning. By the way, no one got paid. People were doing it because they believed in something.
Right.
Person. We knew that we had gotten 200,000 votes at 7 p.m. because we had gotten so many pledges. We had done the math, the predictions, and we knew a minimum of 325,000 people were going to vote. When I saw 260,000 people, and the night before, Galvin said only 150,000 people, I said, something is off. It didn't make any sense. It's like, as a physicist, you got to go in that direction to go to the moon. And some guy's saying, go in that direction. You're going to end up, going into the sun. Okay. That's how off this was. And we called an emergency meeting at 12 midnight on August 31st. I said, why the hell is the Secretary of State saying 150,000 people are only going to vote? It didn't make any sense. And the problem is that people don't study math anymore, which is unfortunate. People do not understand that the entire voting system, from what we're sharing today, and by the way, everyone should take this video. I don't care if you take it down, share it with everyone. We need to show the world that the America, the deep state in America calls everyone else third world Rwanda, third world Zimbabwe, third world India, right? This has become the third world. Massachusetts is a third world failed state.
Yeah.
Because
this is white collar third world.
It's a white collar third world, and we don't.
If anybody perpetuates
people who came from such, you know, Benny, you shared with me. Sorry, Benny, you shared with me your background.
Mhm.
And why is because for us, and I don't take anyone the wrong way. And if you're probably a poor working class person, coming to America and getting anything we have is icing on the cake. So I got
Yeah.
nothing to lose at this point, right?
That's so funny because I tell my wife that all the time. Like, I'm not supposed to be here, right? I'm supposed to get dead or in jail by the time I age 18. So every year past that, that's icing.
40% of blacks are incarcerated, right? By the age of what, 21 or 22.
I'm supposed to be dead in jail. So it's so funny because when we have our conversations on the phone, we say a lot of the same things because the ability and the determination to persevere is just something that's innate. And everything is icing on the cake for me.
Yeah, and I think this dividing black and white, it's to make working class white people think they're a little bit better than their working class black counterpart. When the reality is we're all slaves.
There are books written on it.
What's that?
There are books written on that.
Exactly. We're all slaves. And I think the purpose of these talks, that, as I said, is to take away our rose-colored glasses. You know, we all love this country, but the people who love this, who claim they love this country and wave the flag when they need to send off black and white people to war to fight their bloody wars, are the same people who are profiting, Republican and Democrat, left and right, from this voter fraud. They know this is going on. And that's why I have seen more throttling of my account, more censorship since this issue that we started bringing out. I mean, obviously, when I started doing saying vitamin D was good, YouTube would take down my videos. But this election fraud issue, it goes at the heart of what this country claims it was built on.
Yeah, that's the institution that's worth protecting if you're on the bad end of the spectrum.
Yeah,
it's so disturbing. You know, I can talk about it now without feeling the disgust and the disdain. Like it was, you know, it was a lot of contempt because I was like, this is total hubris if this is true. And the piece that I would just try to get everybody to remember is it's by design, right? It's in there on purpose, right? This is just not good. It's in there on purpose, right? A weighted election. Just tweet how many times you voted in a weighted election, and zero should start trending, right? Zero, the number zero should start trending because you just don't participate. Nobody's participated in a weighted election, right? It doesn't belong there. It obliterates the one person, one vote. That is, everybody could be 3/5. They could be 1/1000. They could be 100th of 1,000. I mean, I could reduce it to zero. It's just not a good look for our election manufacturing process to have something like this. And the Congress should act immediately and use some of that funding to remove this.
Yeah, so basically this feature here, why is a total votes number a double variable? This is in every voting system in the American system. This should not exist. And I think, Benny, the reason this has happened is you have 70% of Congress is lawyers, and they listen to other minions who are paid off by other people. You don't have working people in Congress. I mean, I'm running against two doofuses, two lawyers again. In fact, there were 3 lawyers, Kennedy, Markey, and this other doofus, Koch, okay? So now I have two doofuses. And I think what people need to start realizing is we live in an age of technology, and it's really easy to corrupt technology. We've done it in the vaccine front. You know, we have everyone pushing vaccines, not supporting the immune system. And when you look at software engineering, 1 or 2 people can totally control whole elections because technology itself has been corrupted by the fact you can put a double in there. And the politicians, even if they knew about it and were sincere, if they're lawyers, they can't argue this.
Yeah, there's an email when I was going to search for this, and the guy who was aware of the real purpose for the decimal precision, he said, "Look, it's in here for esoteric reasons."
Esoteric, I saw that.
He said, and that was like the most. I was like, I'm done. Like I get it. I get it when I saw that word. I was like, man, I know what that word means, right? I know what that word means, and you know, a lot of politicians, they don't think it's a problem because they win it. Right. It's not until they lose. Every politician is afraid of the next election. Right. Every politician, because they don't have the grassroots. Like, you are not afraid of your next election because you already touched your supporters. Right. That's a different a medium of how you are energizing your base to participate in the cycle. But a lot of people, I think it's a select few that know that this exists. There have been many activists that have. Jenny Cohn is probably I mean, she's written an almanac about this stuff, and you guys should look at some of the stuff she's written. I make a lot of cameos in there, obviously, but and we're gonna do a demonstration for your audience. Though we're gonna actually show them what this looks like. But I really like the way you slow walking it, to give people time to grasp it, because when we brought it out, I mean, a lot of programmers were saying, well, that's just a lazy programmer and a bunch of other stuff, and I had to keep telling them, you have found every reason to tell me everything but what I've told you, right? You write about everything except that you're wrong. and I'm telling you that when you read the emails, they put it in there on purpose and they gave it a name. And you still keep telling me that somebody made a mistake.
Yeah, they called it a weighted race.
Yeah.
That's what they call it, a weighted race. So it has a lot of double entendre meaning there, weighted race.
Yeah.
So anyway, Benny, this is great. We'll continue. We'll do another session. But in closing, I just want to let everyone know that that feature, the fact that our votes are not whole integers, was done, as Benny has said, and as we've shared in the previous talks, by design, so they could commit fraud at will. And the only way out of it is for us to demand that we have a transparent voting process. That's why, me and Richard and Dylan went down there and we gave this, and, you have to face rebuke from these people, but we don't care. We are the customers. They are supposed to serve us. And that's the attitude we need to take. So what I hope everyone leaves here is gets really angry. And it's time people not be all namby-pamby the world. No, you got to get angry and fuel that anger. And we're giving people an opportunity to take action, because on November 3rd, we're running as a write-in. We're not walking away and saying, oh, we lost. Oh, we got cheated. No, we're going to go jump right in. We're going to run as a write-in candidate, Shiva Ayyadurai. People can write that in. So we want to galvanize everyone out there to support this campaign, share this content, but more importantly, on the ground, we want more volunteers out there to start talking to neighbor, and literally tell people to go again to the website right here and tell people to start pledging to vote for Shiva for Senate. It's a very simple thing. You can make it, everyone in this weekend, make a bunch of phone calls, call your friends up and say, look, we got to get Dr. Shiva in, but go right now and tell us that you're going to be voting for Dr. Shiva. Pledge right here. I pledge to vote for Dr. Shiva November 3rd, because we want to build millions of people doing this right now. So we want to get that on record. And then when you go vote, take a picture of your vote, send it to us. I don't care. Some people say it's not legal. We don't care. That's good, healthy civil disobedience. Do that, send it to us so we have a record of that. And that's how we're going to do this. We're going to put them on notice that we're watching them, and that if they're not going to be transparent, we're going to be transparent.
Or take a picture of your sticker.
Exactly. Take a picture of the sticker.
Take a picture of your sticker right before you vote. So, yeah. I had one thing. The participating voter listing.
Yeah, we ask for those in every town.
The public, and you are in a county, you guys can DM Shiva or me or any one of the people in the organization for Shiva. They are supposed to produce a list of the participants, and Shiva has a concern. But we have a few standard deviations away from the mean with the ratio of people who should have participated, and that is reasonably alarming. Didn't you tell me that they found 3,000?
Yeah. What I just 3 days ago, suddenly 3,000 ballots were found. 3,000. That's a lot in one town. Right. In one town called Franklin, which is still not counted. And then in Newton, they found another 750 ballots. Okay. And apparently we lost by 3 points over there, 4 points over there. Then in another town, they found 100. So that's 3 towns. They found close to 4,000 ballots, right? So that's probably 1,000 per town. And if you take 1,000 per town times, on average, let's say 200 towns, it's 200 ballots. Let's even take 50 per town. Okay.
Yeah.
Right? That's 100,000, right? Or 500 per town, right? My point is, what the hell's going on? That's why this mail-in ballots, and you add the fractional voting piece, you got a nice, beautiful, they have 2 beautiful levers to control an election, right? So they can manipulate the mail-in ballots. I mean, from our numbers, Galvin said 1 million mail-in ballots were sent out. But when you add up the numbers, it's only about 800,000. So what happened to the other 200,000? Okay, well, maybe 20% of the people didn't send in their ballots. It's possible, right?
You know, the mere fact that you can ask that question and not get shut down with evidence highlights the problem. Like, I don't want no confidence. I want some evidence. I need evidence of what happened. And you know, I would just say that in November there's going to be a loser, guys. Somebody's
going to be what?
A loser.
Yeah, there's going to be some loser.
Somebody's going to lose, and the detractors is going to demand evidence that the guy won, and in just the fervor that the supporters are going to demand evidence that the other guy lost.
Right.
It's going to be equal. It's going to be equal weight and force, where somebody is going to want proof that what they saw is actually true.
Yeah, and what we want everyone to leave with is right now the voting systems cannot produce evidence because it's ambiguous.
No.
Right now it's ambiguous, and it is by design created for ambiguity so they could control democracy. That's why we don't have democracy. We're American slaves.
That's not an opinion. That's a fact.
Yep. So let's wake up to the fact that we're all slaves by this fraudulent voting system. Because once we realize that, well, you know, they call it ABC, awareness, then you change behavior, and then you have change, right? So we have to first be aware, then we can start changing our behavior, which is start fighting, and then we can have change, ABC. So right today is really about awareness that you're a slave. Just understand that. Benny and I probably know that because we've had experiences of that, okay? But we want to just educate everyone. We're all slaves, black or white. This is not a black or white issue. It's not a left or right issue anymore. This is an issue of freedom or slavery.
Your membership card is in the mail.
Exactly. Anyway, Benny, thanks a lot. And thank you, everyone. Be the light. Let's win this fight. Go to Shiva for Senate. Support our write-in campaign. And we're going to be Friday again. This Friday at 701 Concord Avenue at my building in Cambridge. Anyone who is a volunteer support of the campaign, please come. We're having a 7 to 9 event, a party. So you're all invited. Thank you, Benny. Thanks for your family. Thank you.
All right.
Hold on, Benny. I'll be back.
Yeah.